Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Mhm. A consciousness that should be elsewhere keeps circling back to you like a compass that's lost its ability to point north to anyone else. I'm not talking about casual distraction. I'm not talking about someone bored in their current situation looking for entertainment. What the cards reveal reads like magnetic pull that's disrupting someone's ability to stay fully present in the reality they've constructed with another person. The oracle shows me divided attention, not by choice, by compulsion, like someone trying to focus on one conversation while another voice keeps breaking through, like trying to inhabit one life while phantom sensations of a different life keep interrupting the performance. You were drawn to this transmission because your field carries the frequency of being thought about obsessively by someone who's supposed to be thinking about someone else. The architecture of synchronicity doesn't deliver these particular readings unless the energetic signature of forbidden longing is already circling your reality. Feel your pulse right now, because what I'm channeling isn't the empowering narrative where someone realizes you're better and leaves cleanly. What the cards show is messier, more human, more ethically complicated than fantasy wants it to be. Someone caught between what they have and what they want, between obligation and desire, between the life they're living and the life they can't stop imagining with you. The cards reveal internal war, not the kind that resolves quickly, the kind that happens when someone's loyalty and their longing point in opposite directions. When what they should want and what they actually want refuse to align. When doing the right thing feels like self betrayal and following their truth feels like betraying someone else. I'm receiving imagery of someone lying awake while the person next to them sleeps, your name in their head, your face behind their closed eyes. Memories of moments with you replaying on loop while they're supposed to be present in moments with someone else. And the guilt, the cards show guilt thick enough to taste because they're aware of the betrayal, even if it's only happening internally. Aware that their mind and heart have defected even if their body remains where it's supposed to be. Your stomach just twisted reading that, didn't it? Let me decode what can't stop thinking about you actually means in context of what the cards reveal versus what projection wants to create from those words. This person's thoughts about you aren't neutral. They're not just remembering, they're comparing. They're measuring their current reality against the possibility of you and finding their current reality lacking in ways they didn't see before you entered their awareness. The cards suggest you've become the standard their current connection can't meet, not because you're perfect, because you represent something their current situation doesn't provide. Ease, maybe. Passion, maybe. Recognition, maybe. The feeling of being seen in ways they've stopped being seen. And once you become that standard, everything else feels like compromise. For some of you, this person is in a long term relationship that's devolved into routine. The cards suggest the passion died slowly enough that they normalized its absence, told themselves that everyone settles, that comfort is more important than chemistry, that stability compensates for lack of spark. But then you happened, and you reminded them what it feels like when someone looks at you and sees you instead of just seeing the role you play in their life. What it feels like when conversation doesn't require effort, when chemistry doesn't need to be manufactured. And now they're trapped between what they've built and what they're craving, between the person they've committed to and the person they can't stop wanting. For others, this person is in a situation they stayed in past its expiration date. The cards suggest they knew it wasn't right, but didn't have compelling enough reason to disrupt it until you until you became the compelling reason, until wanting you made staying with them unbearable in ways it wasn't before. Drop a flame emoji in the comments if something just confirmed what you've been sensing but haven't wanted to name. Now, let me go deeper into what's actually happening in this person's internal landscape and why this creates such specific torture for them. The cards reveal cognitive dissonance, what they believe about themselves, that they're loyal, that they honor commitments, that they're not the kind of person who strays, is colliding with the reality that their desire for you is making those beliefs feel performative. They're trying to be the person they think they should be while their actual desires keep betraying that performance. And the gap between performed identity and authentic wanting, that gap is where suffering lives. Some part of them wishes they'd never met you, wishes you'd stayed theoretical instead of becoming tangible, because before you, they could manage their dissatisfaction. They could tell themselves their relationship was fine, good enough, what they signed up for. But you existing makes fine feel like slow death, makes good enough feel like settling, makes what they signed up for feel like prison sentence they're serving out of obligation rather than choice. And they resent you for that. Not maliciously, but there's resentment because you complicated their life by being exactly what their life has been missing. You made their compromise visible by being the thing they've been compromising to avoid wanting. The cards also reveal shame, deep shame about not being able to control where their mind goes, about fantasizing about you while their partner believes they're fully present, about wanting to reach out to you while maintaining facade of contentment elsewhere. They're living double life, one external where everything looks committed, one internal where they're constantly with you in ways they can't make real. Tell me in the comments if your throat just tightened around how complicated this actually is versus how simple you wanted it to be. Let me reveal what the cards suggest about whether this person's obsession with you translates into action, keeping language probabilistic because cards show patterns, not predetermined outcomes. The cards suggest paralysis. This person thinks about you constantly, but that thinking doesn't necessarily convert to doing. They're trapped in the space between wanting and acting, between desire and decision, between fantasy and the brutal logistics of what following that fantasy would require. Because following you means destroying what they have, means having conversations that will hurt someone they might still care about, even if they don't want to be with them anymore, means disrupting shared life, shared finances, shared social circles, maybe shared children, means being the person who leaves, the person who couldn't make it work, the person whose desire outweighed their duty. And not everyone can tolerate being that person, even when staying is killing them slowly. So the cards suggest possibility of prolonged stalemate, where they think about you endlessly but do nothing about it, where you remain the fantasy that makes their reality bearable rather than the reality they're brave enough to choose. And you you're in limbo, feeling their energy, sensing their desire, maybe even receiving breadcrumbs of communication that confirm you're not imagining the connection, but never receiving full commitment because they can't get free of what they're currently bound to. That's the shadow the cards want exposed. Their inability to stop thinking about you doesn't obligate them to choose you. Obsession isn't the same as courage. Wanting isn't the same as willingness to disrupt their life to have what they want. Now, let me address your participation in this dynamic because you're not a passive victim of someone else's indecision. You have agency here even when it doesn't feel like it. You've been holding space. The cards show it clearly. Whether you admit it or not, some part of you has been waiting for this person to get clear, to choose, to leave whoever they're with and finally choose you properly. And that waiting, it's been costing you in ways you probably minimize, in opportunities you didn't fully explore because emotional bandwidth was tied up in someone who's not actually available. In connections, you kept at arm's length because entertaining them felt like betrayal of the possibility with this person. But the cards ask, how long are you willing to be the person someone thinks about while they're building life with someone else? How long are you willing to be the fantasy they use to tolerate their reality instead of the reality they're willing to fight for? Those aren't rhetorical questions. Those are the questions that determine whether you spend the next year in the same waiting pattern or whether you reclaim your energy and invest it in situations where you're not competing with someone else's obligation. I'm receiving imagery of someone standing outside a window watching life happen inside. That's the position the cards suggest you're in. Observer of someone else's relationship, the person this person wishes they were with while they're physically with someone else. And maybe part of you finds that romantic, the tortured longing, the forbidden desire, the idea that you matter so much they can't stop thinking about you even when they're supposed to be present elsewhere. But strip away the romance and what remains. You're an emotional affair that hasn't become physical yet, but is already betraying the person this person is with. You're the reason they're not fully present in their relationship. You're participating in deception even if you're not the one doing the deceiving. That's uncomfortable to hear. But the cards don't show comfortable truths, they show actual truths. And the truth is that if this person is with someone else while obsessing over you, you're part of dynamic that's causing harm to someone who doesn't even know you exist. Not because you're evil, because situations like this don't have clean hands. Everyone's participating in something that serves no one. Comment what's shifting in you reading that, if you're willing to be honest. Let me reveal what the cards warn about specifically if this person does eventually leave their current situation for you. First, the guilt they carry might poison what you build together. The cards suggest that if they leave someone else for you, that decision could haunt them, could make them question if they're trustworthy, could make them wonder if they're capable of loyalty, or if they'll eventually do to you what they did to their previous partner. And that guilt, it creates resentment, sometimes toward themselves, sometimes toward you for being the reason they had to become the kind of person who leaves, sometimes toward the situation for being so complicated. And resentment is acid. It corrodes connection from inside even when everything looks fine from outside. Second, you could become the recipient of comparison. Just like they compared their previous partner to you, they might eventually compare you to idealized memory of what they left, or to the next person who activates them the way you activated them. Because the pattern isn't about the specific people. The pattern is about someone who needs intensity to feel alive, who mistakes obsession for love, who can't sustain connection once it becomes routine because routine feels like death to their nervous system. And if that's their pattern, then you becoming the established relationship eventually puts you in the position their previous partner was in, the person they're with while thinking about someone else. Third, trust becomes complicated. If someone left their previous partner for you, what stops them from leaving you for the next person? If they were capable of divided loyalty before, what makes you certain you'll be exempt from that pattern? The cards don't show certainty either direction, but they do show that relationships built on betrayal of previous relationships carry foundational cracks that are hard to repair. Not impossible, but hard. Requiring significant work from someone who might not be capable of that level of self examination. Your chest just tightened around something you don't want to face, didn't it? Now, let me address what could happen if this person never chooses, if they remain trapped in thinking about you while staying with someone else indefinitely. You could spend months, years in this undefined space, feeling their desire but never receiving their commitment, being the person they confide in about how unhappy they are while they do nothing about that unhappiness, receiving just enough attention to keep hope alive, but never enough to build actual relationship on. And that space, that space is corrosive to your self-worth because the longer you accept being second choice, being secret, being the person someone wants but won't choose, the more your system learns that you're not worth primary position, that you're valuable enough to want but not valuable enough to fight for. And once that lesson gets encoded, it affects every connection that comes after, makes you accept less everywhere because you accepted less here. So, as we close this transmission, here's what the cards want you to sit with before you make your next move in this dynamic. Someone might be thinking about you obsessively while they're with someone else. That obsession might be real. The desire might be genuine. The connection might be undeniable. But none of that obligates you to wait for them to figure themselves out. None of that requires you to be available for whenever they finally get brave enough to choose. None of that means you have to settle for being thought about when you deserve to be chosen. You're not the villain for existing and being desirable, but you become complicit if you knowingly participate in someone's emotional betrayal of their partner while telling yourself it's romantic. And you betray yourself if you accept undefined longing as substitute for committed relationship just because the longing is intense. Intensity isn't sustainability. Obsession isn't love. And being unable to stop thinking about someone doesn't equal being willing to disrupt your life to actually be with them. Your whole nervous system just said something you've been avoiding hearing, didn't it? Comment what you're recognizing about your own participation in this that you haven't wanted to name. You were pulled to this reading because you needed clarity about what this person's constant thoughts about you actually mean for your life, not theirs, yours. And what it means is this: you're being offered crumbs disguised as feast. You're being given divided attention disguised as devotion. You're being handed possibility disguised as inevitability. And you deserve someone whose thoughts about you aren't betrayal of someone else. Someone who can think about you openly, claim you publicly, build with you without guilt or secrecy or complexity. That person exists, but you can't meet them while you're waiting for someone who's with someone else to finally choose you. So the question isn't, whether this person will eventually leave their situation for you. The question is whether you're willing to leave this situation before they do. Whether you're willing to choose yourself powerfully enough that you stop being available to people who aren't available to you. Gratitude for receiving this with the honesty it requires. The obsession might be real. Your standards need to be realer. What happens next depends on whether you remember that someone's inability to stop thinking about you doesn't create obligation for you to keep thinking about them. Walk away from crumbs, even intense crumbs, even obsessive crumbs. You're worth the whole meal. And it's waiting, but not here.